Hi, everybody, and welcome to TERF Talk Down Under. I'm Angie, and I've got two very special guests with us today. First, we've got Sasha Graham, and she is in Miami in the US. And Sasha is an author, an athlete, and a radical feminist activist. Hi, Sasha.
Hey, what's up? What's going on?
Oh, lots of going on. And you've brought a friend with you. We have VF, who is also from Miami. And VF is the organizer from Female First Florida. And she recently organized the TERF Pride event.
Yes, in New York. And it was a wild success, the first ever TERF Pride. I'm going to go worldwide with this. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. So this little conversation's come about because I was on a space the other day and I heard Sasha pop up. And, you know, you're pretty young, Sasha, right? You're in your 20s, okay?
Yes.
And you basically described all of the thoughts that go on in my head in a way more articulate fashion. And I was completely blown away because, you know, one of the problems that we have is that so many young women don't relate with the fact that most TERFs are middle-aged, basically, you know, and even within the radical feminist community. Like, I remember when I was first introduced to radical feminism when I was 19, there was this massive age difference. And I, of course, rejected it because, one, it was old women. Two, I wasn't a lesbian, and most of the younger women were lesbians. And I wanted that heteronormative, you know, family and stuff like that. So I kind of stepped a little bit away and then came back to it once my, you know, picket fence dream was obliterated because I was never going to be happy in the picket fence. You know, I'd sold myself some sort of lie. And I'm really fortunate I had the radical feminist background. But I'm really interested in young women that discover feminism and they hang around and they get in there, boots and all. I think it's quite fascinating. And I'm really impressed with some of the young women, particularly coming out of America, of all places, that where you don't expect it, that are really staunch and really you know, really out there. I think it's great. So, yeah, I'm just interested in, you know, maybe first with Sasha, how you came to be a feminist and, you know, what brought you to this particular fight?
I've been involved in feminist activism since around the age of 15, 16. And I hadn't come on to radical feminism yet, but I was very into environmentalism, and I'd been exposed to so much information at such a young age. And I'd been, you know, when I was growing up, there was no pride, right? There was no LGBT, there was none of that. You got rocks thrown at you in the street and called, you know, the F word, the F slur.
Yeah.
And, you know, I didn't know, I thought I was asexual because I never had crushes on boys and I always tried to seem normal, and they would ask me who I thought was cute, and everybody liked Chris Brown and I didn't give a crap about Chris Brown. And I had developed a crush on my French teacher, Haitian woman, which, you know, kind of developed my taste, especially now, helped me develop my taste in women, but I didn't know what to call that because I didn't know what a lesbian was. And so as I got older and as I got around, you know, the internet more, the internet was just coming out and you had MySpace and all these different things. And I met a girl online who talked to me regularly about, you know, she was around the same age that I was. She was about a year older than that. And, you know, she taught me about all these things and introduced me to things. And what I learned from her is that I'm a lesbian. And, you know, I grew up in a very conservative household. And so something like that wouldn't be acceptable. And so I didn't come out until very later, but it helped me, especially having to repress that. It helped me a lot learn about women's condition. And I started doing a lot of studying. And from there, it just kind of, it developed more. It took time, but I developed more and more, you know, radical views as time progressed. But it really just started from that moment, learning what a lesbian is and knowing that I couldn't really tell anyone.
Wow. I would have assumed that because you're so much younger that it would have been easier. So, you know.
Not particularly, especially when you are around the Bible Belt, and which is where I grew up, some of where I grew up. And the people, you know, I remember getting, you know, threats by little scrotelets in my grade, just my schoolmates, and, you know, how they would threaten me and how they would say, you know, different things that they would do and how they, cure me. And it was very, you know, people could tell before I could tell. I was very obviously,
I had the same experience.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, you know, and America's not as progressive as people think. And a lot of progressivism it has this cloak, you know, a lot of evil has this cloak as progressivism, but it's not actually
progressive. Yeah.
So what about you, VF? How did you get here?
Well, I've always been on the radical side because I really was not into this genderism stuff as a lesbian, and it outed me out of the community. So I found like Tumblr and like Reddit and the places where we hide when we're younger.
Yeah.
You know, this Discord, you can find them. They're out there. They're just not actively speaking with the rest of the community. You know, they're not in that level. They want to keep in a little circle where they think that they're the only ones like involved, and they study like the older, you know, material and stuff, but they're not doing the activism unless it's Pinwheel's daughter. Pinwheel's daughter is fire. I swear. If you want to talk to a young rad femme, contact Pinwheel Art. Her daughter is amazing. She's been at our Florida events many times and impressive. Just she's been like taught the right way.
Excellent, because we've got a lot of younger lesbian women who watch this channel, which, you know, I'm just like, you know, I'm so flattered that most of my guests are lesbians, but I'm so astounded that like a boring, you know, mum like me has, you know, it seems to be the meeting place, because there's no real life meeting places anymore.
Oh, I know.
And the thing about that is the thing about lesbians is that we have the most to lose from this, right? Because there are 3 lesbian clubs left in the US, and they're being decimated all over the world by gender ideology. Lesbian spaces are being converted into queer spaces, a label that I will never use for myself, because I remember that word being a slur. That word is a slur. And
I've been beaten up for it.
It kind of has these negative connotations.
Like TERF.
Right? It has these negative connotations where, you know, we used to not be able to say the word lesbian, or it used to be used as an insult. And I'm very proud a lesbian for 10 years now. And I just don't see myself sympathizing with or trying to reclaim a slur that was never meant to be reclaimed in the first place.
Yep. You know, it's illegal to be for lesbians to congregate without the opposite sex in Tasmania, the Australian state of Tasmania. And the only reason that it's not illegal in other states is because the law hasn't been tested. So that's the only place where the law's been tested. So
that's, you know, I'd challenge that personally.
Yeah, well, someone did try, but they ran out of money, because this is how they do it. Nobody can afford the legal fees, because what happens is the other side gets represented by human rights councils and grants for trans people and other bullshit. So they get their legal side for free, and the other party
outspend them.
Yeah, and the other party has to raise hundreds of thousands, and in some cases, you know, millions of dollars to defend their basic rights as you know, women. It's crazy.
I would absolutely love to challenge that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, more people need to. This is the only way we're going to win our women's rights, is if people challenge it legally, because they were snuck through by stealth. Like, the laws were changed without any consultation with women's services. So we have full self-ID here. Any man can walk into, or any non-binary person, so, you know, they don't have to change a single thing about themselves, can walk into any public pool, any sporting facility, you know, any women's rape crisis, any homelessness service, and all our public services, including hospitals and mental health units, are now unisex too, which puts people at risk, and women self-exclude. We know that, you know, because they say, oh, but women still use it. It's like, no, they don't. They just don't use the service. And there's no mental health service either.
Men jerking off to it. There's no way I'm going to go use a service as a rape survivor if there's some man there getting off on it. No, these services will no longer be used.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they don't, the thing about it is that a lot of women have this, and it's a valid fear, right? But they have a fear of social exclusion and castigation. So what happens is They don't want to lose access to income. They don't want to lose their privacy. They don't want to be socially persecuted. So what they do is they just don't say anything. Yeah. And they suffer quietly. And that's why I've made myself sort of this more open, you know, element, so that women can look and see and say, okay, she's doing it. And also there's strength in numbers. And what happens is a lot of this rhetoric, it comes with the idea that women shouldn't congregate or women should work to be inclusive, but oppression is not inclusive. It's not at all. And there's nowhere, you know, a man of any race can go to his home country or the country where people most look like him and escape racism. Women don't have that. There's no place on earth where women can run to escape misogyny and sexism. It's everywhere.
We'd have to create our own island. That's the only way.
Even still, must we create our own island? Men will seek to obliterate it. Yeah. They will invade, they will poison, they will murder, they will rape, they will pillage, because they cannot propagate themselves without the female. They can't. And that's why they don't want us to have the power to congregate in our own spaces and to use our own language, because then when those are removed, so is our ability to advocate for ourselves. And so when we no longer have that ability to advocate for ourselves, they can essentially just do what they want, what they've been doing the whole time, but with less and even little to no resistance.
And that's proven here, because trans rights activists have managed to attain trans-only services, but they still want access to women's services. This is about control.
And it also, when you think about the long-term effects of this, the census data changes, right? Because when women don't feel safe using certain services or they don't have services available to them, then the studies that say, okay, well, this is what women are experiencing in this particular demographic, that goes away. And so we don't have the resources to explain our situation or the things that are occurring. And we know that when women make a claim, there's always, well, how can you prove it? What proof do you have? Right? We're always asked for the burden of proof. And so what that does is removes that removes our ability to provide that proof.
For sure. And it's so powerful when women do organise, you know, a group of women emboldening each other. It is such a powerful thing. Gives permission to all women. Yeah.
All over the world, we see movements like Feminism Attack or Femin, or the movement of Kurdish women, or the movement of Latino, the women in the South America, you know, the Brazilian, the Colombian, the women in the Caribbean, even the women in America. When they organize, we can see the progress that's made. And one of the most effective protests, or like organized protests in American history, was a sex strike, where women would refuse to provide any emotional comfort or sexual services to the scrote creatures, because they were like, okay, well, if you're not going to give us this, we're just not going to give you that. Plain and simple. And look how quickly women were able to get their demands met. And there's a saying in communist circles amongst unions: united we bargain, but divided we beg. And they know that if women are divided on this particular aspect, or they don't have the means to organize or congregate, then they can't bargain. They can't say, hey, these are my rights and you can't take them from me. And that's what we see happening globally.
Do you think that a sex strike would work in a culture where men have replaced intimacy with pornography?
Well, I do, to a degree, because pornography provides, it creates the demand for things like prostitution and sex. And, you know, they always, when they become desensitized, they always need more and more extreme things. And especially in a climate where the entire world is being engulfed in hookup culture and just everything just being so readily available at the click of a finger. I think that it could do a lot of good for women.
If we start validating them, it would do a lot of good.
Not just validation, but the sex, the aspect of sex, period.
Hit them where it hurts, for real.
In the case that not even most women, but just enough women just refuse even just the simplest interactions, no physical touch, no sex, none of those things. Because those are things we can provide. We can hug each other. We can shake hands with each other. We can dine and provide emotional comfort for each other. And, you know, albeit it's not for heterosexual women, I presume it's not the same. But, you know, masturbation, there's so many things we can do to avoid certain interactions. If we just say, okay, listen, we're just not going to interact with you, period. The scroll creatures have no chance but to come to the table and to bargain. They have to.
It's interesting. For older women, you know, most of the women that I really admire that have taken a strong political stance on this, they're single. They're single by choice. You know, they refuse to date men, bisexual and heterosexual women. They just refuse to engage in hookup culture. They refuse to like get into the dating pool, and they just refuse to risk the things that they've built for themselves. And, you know, but then there seem to be plenty of women who will accommodate some pretty shitty behavior. And, you know, this hookup culture extends to older people too. And what you find is that people just get on dating sites and they never leave. And they just, as soon as, you know, a partner makes any kind of demand or even a reasonable, you know, demand, then flick, who's next? And you know, but then I find that also the women who do make the decision not to engage with men anymore tend to prosper in other ways. They tend to have better friendships. They tend to be more secure financially because, you know, that they're not risking losing their homes and their security because of divorce and stuff like that. So, you know, there are a lot of benefits of just choosing not to have relationships with men.
Most women, after they widow, they never go back to having a second husband because they feel freedom once they divorce and don't want to do it again, you know?
Yeah. Well,
and the thing about interacting with the scrote creatures is that it takes so much from you. It takes your energy, it takes your capacity for friendships and other relationships, and you're so drained. You're so focused on maintaining the life of an entire other being that you don't give enough energy to yourself, you don't give enough time for yourself, and you don't have the resources available to you to replenish yourself. And so it diminishes women. That's why women who enter marriages die earlier. That's why they suffer higher rates of substance abuse and mental illness issues with mental illness.
Yeah. Yeah, I always feel, you know, particularly since I had kids, I felt like I had 5 children instead of 4, you know, that.
Right, because the man counts as one.
Yeah, you know, and as my kids get older, like, you know, he obviously didn't want to be alone. So, you know, I've just sort of gone on my own way and he repartnered immediately, you know, and it was a bit shocking at the time, you know, but now I'm like, yes.
That's their biggest fear. A scroll creature's biggest fear is loneliness. And that's why we see all of these studies suddenly popping up about the male loneliness epidemic and what's happening, why there's so many incels and, you know, marriage rates and birth rates and blah, blah, blah. It's because they have to propagate themselves. They need conquest. That's what they're always chasing, is that joy and that fulfillment that they feel when they perform acts of conquest. And marriage is an act of conquest because they have this woman. Now they have lifelong sexual access. She will bear his children. She will provide for him. She will ensure that he will maintain his lifestyle by providing him with social capital. He will become wealthier, and she will overall improve his living conditions. Meanwhile, she gets next to nothing in return.
Yeah, I never married, but and it's interesting. Like, you know, my daughter, I kind of had my eldest daughter. I had you know, hadn't planned because I wasn't planning to have kids, but the decisions that I made after that were while I was on antidepressants. And I really believe that I would have made different choices if I hadn't have been affected by the desensitization that some antidepressants bring. And I would have made choices that would have benefited me more if I hadn't have been numbed out to the point that, you know, I couldn't, that I wasn't myself, you know.
I
and as soon as
women deal with men, they have to use more and more antidepressants or drugs, especially during the sex work. I mean,
Yes.
it takes a toll. I used to be a stripper, so I do know.
Yeah, I've got a girlfriend.
Relatable.
Yeah, I've got a girlfriend who works in a brothel, and she tells me the same thing. Every single woman on there is either on, antidepressants, quite strong ones, or they're substance abusing. So, they do go together. And, it's when I got off the medication, I just sort of went, I don't want to date men anymore.
No more. Exactly.
It does a lot. I've never had antidepressants, but I have taken and some antipsychotics for the first time I got sober. And it really does change. It changes everything. It changes everything. But we have to think too, these medications were made to help sustain women in an undesirable condition, because anyone in women's position would feel the way that most women feel when subjected to our condition. So
we got there through trauma. It's not addressing
and then
any of the trauma.
We have to think too that like the entire medical industry is built on the concept of conquering the female, right? Yes. Because the entire concept of female hysteria is the basis for medical treatments in regards to women. So it's not about addressing the problem. It's about making the women more malleable, more compliant.
Yes. Yeah. And these drugs, it's you go to your GP and you say, oh, these are the things that I'm struggling with, oh, that's anxiety, do you want some pills, oh, you're depressed, rather than get to the root of it, because the mental health system's completely collapsed. It doesn't exist. And if you can access mental health support, it's through that patriarchal lens where you're responsible basically for your own happiness. And, it's a cesspit for women. It really is. And
that's why they're putting off girls'
any of the trauma. Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's the whole thing of not resolving the trauma, because then they have like dependent, women who can't think straight, who are sort of dissociated and whatever. And then we'll put up with all sorts of shit.
And there's so few studies too on the long-term effects of taking these medications. Yeah. And I haven't been accepted to a new school yet, so I haven't done any studies. But I suspect that these medications, when taken over time, erode a woman's ability to regulate herself, her thoughts, and her own emotions.
I agree. I feel like I lost 12 years of my life. 12 years. And I had 3 children in that time. And I'm devastated for them and for myself that I lost sight of who I was, because I was literally drug affected. And these drugs were... And I'm educated, I have a bit of a psychology background. Like, I didn't go into it as a first response to what was happening. I tried all the other things, and it's like, well, you've tried everything else. Here, have this magic pill. And things did initially improve, but then it set me down on the path and it set me down on that pathway that, that heteronormative path where I never questioned anything and just drifted off into and then woke up one day and went, what the fuck am I doing here? And I talk to my kids about it. I say, look, maybe, mum had the best intentions when she became a mum, but in some ways I'm not a normal mum. I'm not, comfortable down at down being a soccer mum, or and they get it. They get their mums a little bit weird, And they seem really reasonably well adjusted coming, from someone like me and coming, and from a broken home, they seem to have their heads together. So maybe it isn't all bad.
That's amazing.
Maybe, that, and there's that stereotype too. Oh, broken home, kids that grow up with single mums, they're all going to be dysfunctional.
That's
no,
so
they're
sad.
not. They're not.
No, of course not. I think they're better off.
And we have to think too, those statistics are very skewed because they don't take into account how much abuse the woman and the children received before the mother became a single mother. Yep. They're not all taken from single mothers who started as single mothers. Some single mothers become single mothers. Some single mothers have no choice but to flee abusive circumstances. And those things are really what determines how a child turns out. Because if you look at the scrote creatures, when they have little scrotelets, the scrote creature's behavior influences the young boy. Right. And so how they view women is completely, almost entirely dependent on what they're exposed to from their father first. And so they intend to, or they tend to mimic their father's behavior. They mimic the older scrote's behavior. They mimic what they see in pornography. They mimic what they see in media. And those usually show women from a point of subjugation. We've never seen true, genuine, a scrote creature and a female on the same terms and equal standing in an equitable relationship. We've never seen it. We don't see that in media. It's always the woman making the compromise with the scrote.
Yeah.
The woman
the media
always
is written by men, for men.
Yeah.
The woman is always the one being made to be the reasonable party or be the bigger person or make the compromise. But the compromise is never made with the woman. She's never allowed to be the unreasonable one. She's never allowed to be the one whose demands are being met. It's always
or
her
show emotion,
sacrificing for him.
Or being
and for the
angry
children
or
too.
having emotions.
Yeah. I mean, most of the things I accommodate are for the kids. And it just so happens that most of those things also benefit my former partner. So they keep you trapped. They keep you trapped.
And it's a psychological trap as much as it is a legal one. Because the more you're forced to interact with them, the more you're around them, the more normalized their behavior becomes. And I was talking about this with a friend the other day. When you're exposed to certain conditions, those things become more. It's the same thing with pornography, right? When you start doing things like camming or OnlyFans, the things that you once thought were so extreme and so crazy, they're no longer that crazy to you. Because you go, well, I'm already doing this. So how much crazier is prostitution? Or how much crazier is like pornography? How much crazier is BDSM? I'm sorry?
They did that in the movie. You remember the movie Clerks or whatever it was? It was about a waitress, thing. And you start as a waitress and then you maybe become a stripper. And the next thing you know,
I've never seen it.
Yeah, it was a joke that was going on in that movie.
But yes, this is what happens, and it's proven time and time again that when you're subjected to certain conditions, it's like the fly in the jar, right?
Yeah.
They put the flies in the jar, and then in 3 generations, when they open the lid, the new generation of flies won't fly out. They won't leave the jar, and that's because that's the normal for them now. They've been in the jar this whole life. Everyone they've known has been in the jar their whole life. So what reason do they have to exit the jar?
Yeah. What I found interesting the last week or so is this Andrew Tate bullshit, because all the people who are screaming, sex work is work, it's so empowering. OnlyFans is empowering. Look how silent they've been when this predator is exposed as exploiting 15-year-old girls into a webcamming empire. They're so quiet that you can't hear a peep about Andrew Tate. The media is quiet. All the sex workers feminists are quiet, not a friggin' peep.
And the reason for that is they have no argument, right?
No.
The thing about prostitution, the thing about the sex trade is that when people say, sex work is work, and the way to decrease harm is decriminalization, but that's not at all true.
No.
If you look at the conditions of women in Australia, if you look at the failure of Canadian stripper visas, if you look at the condition of women in Germany, the facts say otherwise. The harm is increased with legalization, and there's almost nothing you can do because it's legal.
Yeah, they only made it legal because politicians were getting caught. Because now there's no raids because it's illegal. Now they're not, it's legal now, so they're not raiding people. They're not pulling people over in the street. They're not, the police are not actively going to red light districts. And so now the elite men who use these services aren't getting caught. That's why it was legalized. It's had no flow-on benefits to women at all. If anything, it's endangered them.
Women absorb most of the harm that comes with the legalization of any kind of element of the sex trade, any particular industry of the sex trade. And if you look at how women are affected, they're traumatized. They have PTSD, and when you enter the sex trade, it's almost impossible to leave. And so what they're doing is they're targeting younger and younger demographics of girls in their developmental years, where they're supposed to be learning different skills, and encouraging them. Oh, well, it's fast money, it's great, you have complete autonomy, this, that, and the other thing. But when they want to leave, they have no skills to fall back on. They have no degrees. They have nothing that they've pursued outside, and they don't even know their own interests. And so by the time their brain is fully developed and they say, I don't want this anymore, they don't know where to go. There are no support services that are available to help them exit the sex trade. And so they end up begrudgingly continuing to sustain themselves via the sex trade.
Yep. Yep. I've
That's
got a
why
friend
they
who went
normally
back to
die
it.
by 38.
Yeah.
38 is the age that most sex workers like off, like by suicide or like complications or John killing you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a prominent prostituted woman here who wrote a book, does a comedy skit, and, you know, is out and talks openly about her time working in a brothel, and she took her own life last week. So nobody's talking about that either.
Of course.
They never will, because it doesn't fit the narrative. And the most powerful people are the ones pushing for this, because they understand it's like chattel slavery, right? You want these people in a cycle that perpetuates itself. You want them to have these inescapable means. You want them to have a lack of access to resources. And I don't know how it is anywhere else to this degree of detail. But once you enter the sex trade, once you openly enter the sex trade in America, you can no longer work in healthcare, you can't work in child services, and you cannot work for the government.
Here, self-ID and deregulation of prostitution, decriminalization of prostitution were introduced within 2 years of each other. So, you know, they go hand in hand. Two
lobbies working together. The trans lobby and the porn lobby is the same lobby. Well, see,
because the porn lobby actually perpetuates the sex trade, and the sex trade perpetuates gender ideology. So it goes in a circle. What you have is you have an issue with these pornographic depictions of women that dehumanize women, and you hear all of the quotes that gender ideologues share about women, and they're eerily similar to how women are represented in sex trade or even in pornography, and they're so extreme. But pornography normalizes it. The sex trade normalizes that. What it tells the public, what it tells everyone, even the young girls who don't participate and don't watch it, it says ultimately women are vehicles for the provision of male pleasure, and they are vehicles to carry to help the scrote creatures propagate themselves.
Yeah.
So you have two routes you can choose. You can be a wife who helps the scrote creature perpetuate itself and obtain his wealth and things of that nature, or you can be the whore that I don't know if I can say that because it's YouTube. Who is used like as a living sex doll for the scrote creature to get its pleasure from.
Yeah, I didn't see porn by choice for very many years, couple of decades. Once I realised that I could actually say no to people who wanted to watch it, and I was uncomfortable around it, and I said, "Oh, I don't have to. I don't have to say yes to watching this." So I didn't watch it for decades, and I managed to see it again because I have a look at who these trans rights activists are following, that are following me. And I click on their page and there's hardcore pornography. And I'm like, ugh.
Always.
So it definitely goes hand in hand. You know, and it's all
one
over.
Thing too is the lack of regulation on pornography.
Yes.
They're using this to indoctrinate younger girls into thinking that's normal behavior, into thinking that's normal sex. And the boys, they become so desensitized when they're young that as they grow older, they want more, they crave more and more extreme things. And that's why you see girls as young as 13, girls as young as 12 being recruited into the sex trade, because these scrotes who have been so desensitized to normal sex, to normal relations with women, that they have to have something extreme at any cost.
That's true. Yep. And what I've seen that's out there is absolutely just shocking, like absolutely. And it's funny that all of it is about male dominance. Like even the scenes that don't include men are all about men, of course. So, you know, and
even as a lesbian, when I unfortunately had entered the sex trade, I was threatened very regularly with rape and told that if I didn't perform in certain scenes, then I would be harmed or brutalized. Of course, I didn't do it because I'm that type that likes to fight. So I'm like, well, bring it. But there are plenty of women who don't, plenty of women who do everything they can to avoid conflict, because that's who women are. They usually look for a more reasonable way to achieve a solution that works for both parties. And that solution is usually the woman compromising her values, compromising her body, compromising her mental health, what have you. And this is why I push so hard for the abolition of even pornography, because there's no such thing as ethical. It will never exist. There's always going to be this narrative that floats around it, that's going to ultimately harm women.
Yeah, if it happens, so do you think it will be in stages? Like, do you think that an age verification is a step towards it, or do you think it has to be just completely shut down?
Complete. It has to be
complete, because it's like you have to rip the Band-Aid off, right? You have to pull the needle out. It's like pulling off a tick. You can't just, okay, here's a leg and here's a leg and here's an arm and here's an arm and here's the body. Okay, time for the head. It has to be the whole thing, because even if you do it in steps, they're still going to find more innovative ways to supply the demand.
On tape. It's all rape on tape.
Yes,
they're paid
I agree.
I agree. Utilize a woman.
But is it possible? Like, that's why I'm
it is, but I don't see it happening in our lifetime.
No. Yeah. Because age verification would be a good start, but I would prefer it was just gone, because it's just, do what you like in your own bedroom, do what you like in your own circle. We don't need to see it. We don't need to put it out there for other people to see.
Well, not just that, but because so many people become desensitized, it makes them more violent. Yeah. And so we can't just wait. We can't wait until people are more comfortable. We can't wait until people say, oh, okay, well, here's this alternative. It has to be gone, because it's done so much damage already. Yep.
Agreed.
And there's lots of, teenage girls being told that they need to fund their surgeries by doing porn. This is totally a circle. Like, you don't want to be the sex object, so to cut off your tits, you're going to do porn.
Yeah, for sure. And there is still, they've become the freak show porn. They've become a porn category in themselves, trans mask porn. It's just, they're still being exploited while they're trying to escape being exploited. It's just, but this is inevitability. Yeah, it's inevitable for women. If men can find a way to exploit you, they will.
It used to be back in the day, butch lesbians could be away from men by having this look, but they've marketed it. They've taken it away from us.
Man.
And they will continue to, because everything eventually becomes, they will find a way to sexualize and fetishize anything. Anything. Rape, racism, any crime of violence against women, they will find a way to perpetuate their sexuality.
Yeah.
And there's feminists that want to promote feminist porn, where they basically invite these men to like beat us up and get their 5 minutes on, Fox News. But that is in a way of doing feminist porn that men are getting off to. They do this so that they can watch us suffer.
Yes, no doubt about it.
We don't get our 5 minutes to say what we want to say. We have to sacrifice some woman to the mob of men to get our 5 minutes.
Yes.
And you hear a lot about Sodom and Gomorrah, but it wasn't a story about corruption. It was a story about rape. It was a story of a father giving up his daughter to this mob of men to be taken advantage of and harmed. And that's essentially what porn is. It's men sacrificing future generations, scrote creatures, sacrificing future generations of women to provide for this future generations of scrote sexual desire. And we have to think too, it's such a violent thing that commodifies women to the point of the new girls that enter the industry, they become a commodity. And so they have this high turnover rate. There are some people who don't even stay in the sex trade a couple of months, right? Yeah. They want to leave because it's so humiliating. And the only people who are making any real money are the ones who are accepting. They're doing everything. They're accepting every offer that they're given. And that's how you get popular. You have to accept everything. And you're told that
what's the man making the money?
The next girl will. If you don't accept this, the next girl will, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's always that fear that you're replaceable. And they want to be beloved. A lot of these people, they chase that fame for the same reason. The same reason people become singers and actors. They want to be beloved, or sometimes they just need They just need that little push. They want that fame. They want that crowd of people who are always going to check in and see what they're doing. And it's not a vanity thing, but it's also, it's taking advantage of women who come from conditions where they aren't having their emotional needs met. They aren't having their financial needs met. And so they fall into this industry that will essentially chew them up and spit them out. And they don't know that, because this industry is so glamorized and it's being paraded as this great way to practice sexual autonomy, and this great way to be like proud and sex positive and things of that nature. But it's ultimately going to harm her, and it's going to harm her physical body as much as her mental.
And it's the men that they love it. Sorry?
There have been so many, I have screenshots actually. There have been so many outbreaks, and I'm glad I left when I did. There have been so many outbreaks of STDs, STIs, and they've had to pause filming, and they only do so for a week, right? They retest and then they resume filming after a week. And it's never, it's one of the most unregulated trades in the world, the sex trade. And that's how women end up being so destroyed by these practices, because there's no safety protocols in place. And even if they were, they would fake it. There are scrote creatures that fake their tests just to get with the top girl, you know, just to see. And then they find out after the shoot that this test results aren't real. And sometimes they are clean, and sometimes they're not. And that new girl, she has to find other work. She has to do something. Because when you test, when you test positive on anything, you have to keep testing until you're clean.
Yep.
And even still, she's got to, because the sex trade is this fast money under the table type of industry, you have to look for a way to sustain yourself while you're not getting booked for porn shoots. And guess what that means? Prostitution.
Prostitution. Always. That's a doorway after porn.
Well, after 30 years of being around survivors of the sex trade, one thing that hasn't changed is that the women that I know are introduced to the sex trade by their partners, by their male partners. I know very, very few women who just decided to do it off their own bat. It's always been at the encouragement of male partners.
That's
I always
so sad.
say there's no woman who decided to do it off the bat. There's always the influence from the scrote creatures, even if they weren't in a relationship. There's always that scrote creature in her ear telling her, oh, okay, well, you know, and you sleep on that, right? There's a better way. There's an easier way to make money. You look so good. You can make so much money if you did this. And they do that. They get on the internet with the same accounts they use to shame these women, saying it could be so much easier. It could be so much easier. It could be so much easier. And when you keep hearing that, you go, okay, well, let me see what this is about. And by the time you're in it, it's too late. It's almost always too late. And they get these girls at as young ages as possible, again, so that they don't have a meaningful way to escape. It's the
same kind of thing with male, like, you know, violent women usually tend to be groomed by a violent male. Is not really something that comes from women to have this like insane violence. It's usually grooming by some abuser male in her family, older abuser male. That's every single story of like these women that are like serial killers. It's not like a woman that just had a decent life and then decided, I'm going to chop up all these other people.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you could have a scrote creature with the most normal life and loving parents, and it still becomes a rapist.
Yeah.
It still becomes a murderer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how TERF and SWERF are thrown around as insults, and I'm like, I'm not insulted. I'm sorry.
So proud.
Yeah.
The thing about that
pride.
is it's a means to kind of, it's the same tactic that Donald Trump employs when he wants to delegitimize statements made, but like very valid statements made by his opponents. He'll just give them a nickname and people will mock them because they find it to be funny and entertaining. They find it to be, you know, sort of, if he says it, then it must be valid. And there's a reason why you see so many charismatic people who are under that umbrella pushed to the forefront. And so when they use these terms, they catch on. They become slang. They become normalized in our language. And it's a way to ultimately attempt to humiliate and silence anyone in opposition to those industries, behaviors, and institutions.
And we've had even our women's marches have been appropriated by men and dominated by trans rights and sex workers' rights.
They will speak over us.
Pardon?
They will speak over us about the definition of a woman. I mean, like, men have no limits, no shame at all.
And it's the most degenerate men that these supposed feminist or or pro-women organizations are pushing to the fore to perpetuate this pro-trans, pro-sex work narrative. Like, these are the most disgusting.
All things that benefit the scrote creatures.
Yeah. But this is government and institutions. They're dragging these, pardon the pun, dragging these disgusting, revolting men out to speak for women. Just ugh. And I think feminism and women's politics are sort of just seen as
captured,
disgusting. Yeah, but they're seen as a negative thing. So it's only like the extreme sort of left-wing virtue signalers that even pay attention to feminism and women's rights and things like that. And so you have this sort of cultural echo chamber where the rest of society, the women actually doing the hard yards out in the community and actually living, the normal life of a woman, feels that feminism offers her nothing. So
and that's by design, because they see all of these images of quote unquote sex positivity, all these empty, hollow things, which I like to call Hollywood feminism. It empties all these empty, hollow things. It does nothing to advance the position of women. It does nothing for female self-determination. It does nothing for women. It does not feed your soul. And so when they see these empty things and they see these perverted men who dance in the streets naked, and they see all of these things that don't serve a purpose for women and they don't serve our interests, they go, well, feminism is nothing for me.
Yeah.
And that's
then
by
they
design.
blame us for it. Then they blame the feminists for it. They say, "Oh, that represents feminists."
And that's because they're educated that way. It's like the same re-education that's used by dictators to essentially control the masses. And so when they have this misplaced hatred for feminists, they won't organize. They won't look into organizing. They won't look into their own interests. They won't learn about things like female self-determination. They won't learn about things like women's liberation, and they won't look into the history of the movement.
For sure.
They'll just take what they heard is that it's our fault, and then we should not even know how to vote. I mean, there's women out there that are blaming women voting on why there's terms. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about that, is that they've been watching our movement forever, especially the governments. And what they do is they ostracize the feminists. They make it seem like all of our talking points are crazy, when it's really just a lot of us predicting the future because we have common sense.
Yeah.
And they will, when everyone's walking away and they don't want to hear what the feminists have to say, that's when the appropriators come in, they swoop in and they steal our rhetoric and they steal our critiques and they steal our social analysis, and they use it to appear as if they're reasonable or academic or like they've experienced these things. But what they're doing is they're stealing from women's critiques and women's lived experiences and women's social analysis and things of that nature.
And it's the elite that are stealing from working class women and poor women. That's
exactly. And so when these misguided women hear that, they go, "Oh, okay, well, this might be onto something. This might be onto something." And all of that is a removed potential, or I wouldn't even say removed potential. It's a displaced potential for women to organize with other women under the banner of feminism, which is already so strong, right? And there's only strength in numbers. There's only more strength. And they don't want us to have this unified banner, because imagine what a global unification of women could achieve. Yeah. Can you imagine that? Could you imagine if women had our own international army and we were sending our troops to liberate the women of Kyrgyzstan and Afghanistan and in China and all these places that are taking advantage of women's condition? Imagine if we had a woman's land. A small country populated by, let's say, 500,000 women, and it was working for we had female scientists, and well, I'm not going to say we had scientists. We had our own production companies, and we produce our own media, and we do our own agriculture, and all of these different things. An entire female-run ecosystem That's radical feminist infrastructure. And that has so much to offer women who are struggling in both a capitalist hellscape and a communist hellscape. Because if you look at the comparison of these countries, women in China are just as oppressed as women in the US and everywhere else, or even more so.
Yeah, that's what we need. And this is, you know, one of the few benefits of this you know, a culture war and the TERF movement is that it's
bringing us together.
Yeah, and women from, you know, diverse backgrounds, and it's a global movement. So that's, you know, I take heart in that. You know, but want to talk about TERF Pride. I'd like you to tell our viewers what it was all about.
Well, it is me saying that women need to take back pride for lesbians, women, and girls. These are the things that the trans have taken away from us, and we need to remember that. We need to remember who we are as women, girls, and, you know, lesbians. Without men telling us, defining us, we need to define ourselves. And time to start, you know, like, let's do it already.
And so what did you do?
Take pride.
What did you took to the streets?
We went to New York because that's where, like, Pride took place originally, you know, like, so I started with the Take Back for Lesbians. That's this year. And we're going to do it another year for mothers. We're going to switch it around with a focus on different groups, you know, with a mission. And it's like, this is where this is aimed against us. So we're going to take it there. Like, next year, Brittany says that there's a center that, like, is trying to erase mothers. So we're going to go over there and, like, make it a big production. Yeah, and we wanted to make this globally, where women can make a protest or a party, you know, just have something that every July that women are going to get together and do this.
Yeah, great.
And the thing about this is women need to organize. We have to be willing to put boots on the ground. We have to be willing to show that we have numbers. And that's something that was effective in the past that we really don't do anymore. And that's because of the fear of the surveillance state and the fear of this new cancel culture. It's not that new because it's been going on since forever. Think back to the Salem witch trials. That's the original cancel culture right there, is just the burning of women. One of the things that we have to do is that we have to be prepared, right? We have to be prepared to sacrifice. We've been making sacrifice for the scrote creatures for so long. We have to be willing to make sacrifices for the future of our condition and the future of our daughters.
Yeah,
for
this
sure.
Is a battle for our lives, because if not, what's going to happen? We have no more voices, when we have no more rights.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You know, I worry for my daughters. I really do. I worry for my son too. But I worry for my daughters that they'll just end off as, you know, breeders or.
This is the first generation in the US. It's going to have less rights than our mothers, because we've been given trans now. So our rights no longer matter, because a man can magically claim gender oppression and take them from us.
Do you think a change of government will change anything in the States? Because it certainly won't here.
It will change some things, but not enough, right? We have to try to advocate for more radical women in positions of power, not just any women, but radical women. And so even starting small with things like the school board or mayors or governors and things of that nature, we have to start getting more radical women into office, because we are the only ones who are going to look out for our own interests. Women are the only group that has no political lobby, no political caucus, no special interest group. We have no organizations that advocate on our behalf.
Yeah,
I say we have to be as motivated as a pedophile is to get his hands on your child. You have to think of it like night and day. You really have to.
Yeah, because if we don't, they will essentially get what they want. Look at how now they're trying to introduce the I'm not calling them MAPs. They are pedophiles, and I will call them pedophiles. And they are trying to legitimize that as a sexuality. And what they want, for me, I just don't believe there's such thing as a non-offending pedophile. I'm sorry. You subjugate children within your mind. Your behaviors are going to reflect your thoughts. That is a truth. That is a global truth. And there is the only solution to that is death. I am sorry, but that is the truth.
That is
women have to be willing women have to be willing to reject compromise, because it's what got us this in the first place, right? Compromising with the scrote creatures and being willing to work with them and trying to team up. No, we have to put our interests in, we have to put our interests in the forefront. If we look at the history of all of the movements that have ever been successful, they've always been started with the actions of women. The French Revolution, the Prohibition, all of these different things that were pursued relentlessly, women built those foundations. And so if we don't look after our interests now, they will be forever lost. We are already losing our language. If we lose anything else, it's gone for good.
See, we've got out pedophiles in our third major political party. Like, you know, like they're open, they're out. It's terrifying. And the same party is bringing in legislation to outlaw any gender critical voices. And the media's the media's complicit in its silence. Like, and yet yesterday it came out that some male childcare worker had raped 91 girls, committing thousands of sexual offences, and the whole media is blown up with outrage, while a self-admitted pedophile is, you know, happily sitting in one of the major political parties writing policy to silence women. Like, that's modern Australia.
Women need, the problem is that women fear the wrong things. We fear the surveillance state when we should fear, like, it's our world is already 1989. We're already living that. We're living this disgusting mishmash of The Handmaid's Tale in 1984. I said 1989, but I meant 1984. We're living this disgusting mishmash of 1984. And The Handmaid's Tale, and it's only going to get worse if we don't do anything now. Everything that's been happening in the past 5 years has been leading up to this moment. We need to be enraged enough and afraid enough to take action. That is the only way to solve this issue. Yeah, 100% agree. I've been doing this in my own name, copped the worst that they could ever throw at someone, you know, apart from attacking me personally. Nobody's come and killed me. Nobody's assaulted me yet. And, you know, I do it all again. I have no regrets about any of the abuse that I've copped. It's been, at times, it's had me in tears. It's been frightening. You know, I've had the fact that I'm a women's rights activist, you know, I've had it weaponized towards me by my ex-partner, by, you know, other people. They make up all sorts of horrific lies about me. And yet I would do it all again, because I believe so strongly that everyday women have to stand up. You know, I've got a lot of, you know, on the other hand, I say, oh, just do what you can, you know, but really I just think, you know, you're scared of losing your job, but if you don't stand up, who will? Who will?
Exactly.
You know? And somebody's got to be willing to, those of us who are tough enough to roll with the punches, we got to do something, because we have to think about the next generation of girls who are not going to be able to find themselves, who are not going to be able to define themselves in their struggles, who are not going to be able to access resources and get help when they're in trouble. We have to think about that, and we have to put boots on the ground to make sure that they have that in the future.
For sure. I want to be the example of change and live it. Yeah.
You know, I know if my grandkids Google me in the future, at the moment it's going to come back that I'm a Nazi. But I hope that I've left, you know, a large enough footprint that they can actually see what all this was about. You know, why is mum on your voice? Why is mum on the phone? You know, and understand that this thing that I think in some ways they think they're like, what's she doing? You know, like they don't understand. And it does take me away from my kids sometimes. I hope in the future that they realise that I was doing this for them. You know.
Well, for those of us without children, we salute you, and we will make sure that we will fight so you can fight. And I want the Nazi thing is kind of funny to me, because I don't know about the others, but there's so many trans identifying males that say that they've had a Nazi phase and that it's so normal. Male leftists in big communist circles that say that they've had this Nazi phase and they came out of it and became trans or whatever. So it's very ironic to me that they call anyone else Nazis. But I would love to see them try and call a Black woman who's fought furiously against all sorts of dictatorships in other countries, and went to Venezuela and actually got stranded trying to distribute resources. Call her Nazi.
Yeah. Well, there were women from all cultures at our Let Women Speak event here in Melbourne, and the two most powerful politicians in the state actually got up and labelled us all far-right Nazis. So in spite of the evidence on the live stream that it was a broad group of women. So, you know, that's how desperate they are.
Nazis have never been women. I'm sorry. The Nazi army was completely full of men. I mean,
yeah. Even the Nazis have come out and condemned us, said that our whole agenda was to convert women to lesbianism. They said, no, we can't stand those women. But the Nazis turned up because the anti-fascists put up a sign that said, we're going to fight Nazis, with a picture of Kelly J. Keane. So, of course, if they fought them. You know, but the thing that what's happening here is this whole Nazi thing. It's basically they keep showing up to all these events and the police come out and the anti-fascists come out and they have like this pissing contest between them. And it is there as propaganda for the state to go, oh, look, there's Nazis. There's Nazis. Oh, you have to do what we want or the Nazis are going to come for you.
How do we know the difference between men dressed all in black? What group is which? Like, there's no difference between either one of you guys.
They're recruiting for the neo-Nazis. If you stand there and look at the average non-binary trans anti-fascist, and then you look at these buff, disciplined men, and you're a young boy growing up looking for direction in your life, which one are you going to choose? So they're basically trying to recruit Nazis. The media and the government is sort of putting Nazis on the front pages of the newspaper and amplifying their voices and blaming women for those voices being amplified. Of course.
Oh, because women are always responsible for the behaviors of the scrote creatures. We're always responsible for how the scrote creatures turn out and the decisions they make. And they're poor little female babies. I said that too. Thankfully I have been, after, when I first started doing music, I got in a lot of rape threats because people, they weren't fans of the type of rock that I was doing at the time. Oh. And so I got sterilized, but I always make this little joke. It's either a girl or an abortion.
Yep. I think it's a feminist duty. It's either that or adopt.
We also have to think too, and it's like, it's fair because it's actually a necessity, because if you think about it, think about the femicide, think about all the little girls that had to die so that little scrotelets can be born and further perpetuate, because they know that they need to outnumber us in order to control us. They know that they need to have access to our spaces in order to control us, and there's only one way to do that: through femicide and through gender ideology. And gender ideology also, it works doubly because it perpetuates sexist stereotypes about women and female biology and things of that nature. And so they know that if we can't combat gender ideology, we don't stand a chance.
Yeah. Yeah, and this frightening commodification of women's bodies that stem from that, like this dehumanizing language, the rise in surrogacy, the normalization of using women's body like cattle. It's a frightening prospect. But we're all,
and you hear all this gender oppression, but you don't hear about the human breeding farms. You don't hear about the bride kidnappings. You don't hear about the ghost weddings. You don't hear about the women in Afghanistan being banned from going to school and how all of the rollbacks of women's rights. You don't hear about how the women in America are losing their autonomy. The reproductive rights are being rolled back. They're attacking no-fault divorce. Who's talking about it? Only radical feminists, because again, only we are interested in female interests. Only we are invested in the woman's plight.
Yeah, we've been completely silenced here in Australia. Like everything, all language in the media has been, is gender rather than sex, and the pro-trans propaganda is nonstop, absolutely nonstop. And the men are always referred to as women.
So women need to gather.
And you know what? This is the first phase of the 8 phases of genocide, right? Because they're taking away the language. They're rolling back the rights. Let me pull up that chart, actually.
That's why we need to fight now while we still can gather. Gather up as many women, as motivated women, and wake them up, because it's only going to get worse. It really will.
So are you going to do your TERF marches? Like, are you going to do them regularly and try and encourage women to come out?
Yes, of course. We believe in
and I will be
annually, and we're going to do local events for Female First Florida.
Yeah. See, we get together as a little group, and every Wednesday usually we go and meet up somewhere that is, either at a politician's office or in an electorate that has an election coming up, or we try and be strategic about it, and we just turn up with signs. And now sometimes there's only 2 or 3 of us, but we put those images on social media, and sometimes there's 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 or more shares of these images. We had the daily.
So we're actually at the we're actually at the third stage. Third and fourth stage is discrimination. So the dominant group denies civil rights or even citizenship to identified groups. And then dehumanization, those perceived as different are treated with no form of human rights or personal dignity. So that's where we are. And this is the point at which it is still reversible. The point where we can fight before there's organization, because once there's organization, it becomes incredibly harder. And by then we've completely lost our ability to organize. Do
you want to read them all out? Do you want to read all of them out?
So the first stage is classification. The differences between people are not respected. There's a division of us and them, which can be carried out using stereotypes or excluding people who are perceived to be undesirable. And then there's symbolization. This is a visual manifestation of hatred. So the Jews in Nazi Europe were forced to wear yellow stars to show that they were different. And that's how the label TERF works. It works as the same way as wearing this little label that says, that's what you need to demonize. That's what you need to object to. And then you have discrimination. The dominant group denies civil rights or even citizenship to identified groups. So women's civil rights are being rolled back, right? We have all this normalization of female commodification, the removal of female spaces, the shutdown of organizations and women's interest groups, which is actually happening globally. Then you have dehumanization. So those perceived as different are treated with no form of human rights, personal dignity. Obviously, the end of women's spaces, the right to speak about, losing our language, organizing, things of that nature. And then organization. Genocides are always planned. So regimes of hatred often train those to go out and carry destruction of a certain group of people. And we see that through femicide. We see that through women being forced to enter the sex trade and then dying as a result of that. And then 6 is polarization. So that's when the propaganda gets spread and it becomes more normalized and there's not really much vocal opposition to it. Preparation, the perpetrators plan the genocide. They often use euphemisms such as the Nazis' phrase, the final solution, to cloak their true intentions. They create fear of the victim group, building up armies and weapons. And that's what happens when we see these forms of violence being perpetrated against women, being normalized, like the woman who's was permanently left disabled after being attacked by a trans-identified man.
That's in my city.
Or how they're being, oh wow, really?
Yeah, Melbourne, Australia. That's where that woman had her shoulder broken. It's a woman that I know that I've marched with. That was in my city.
How's she doing?
She's doing okay. She's playing her bass again. So, but she's going to have compromised movement in that shoulder for the rest of her life. And he got off. He didn't even get.
If I was there that night, he wouldn't have walked away with all his teeth. I can tell you that. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And then persecution. Victims are identified because of their identity, and death lists are drawn up. So that's when they dox the women and make sure that they are targets for violence, or they run them out, they burn their houses down, things which has happened.
They do that in Mexico to women, to feminists.
Yes.
Yes. Very common.
They do it in China too. They run them out of their homes. They set fire to the cars, to the houses, things of that nature. And then extermination. The hate group murders their identified victims in a deliberate and systemic campaign of violence. Millions of lives will be destroyed or changed beyond recognition through genocide. And then the last step is denial. Years later, generations deny the existence of any crime took place.
Yeah.
So that's where we're headed.
So they're always, they're always deflecting and accusing us of doing what they're actually doing. So this talk of trans genocide is actually,
they put it on their signs that they want to decapitate us. I mean, it's open.
Yeah.
The promotion of
I've
violence.
actually been sent rape porn for speaking out against this and having them say that they would hang me until my feet kept kicking. or quit kicking, until my feet quit kicking. And when I saw that, I became completely disillusioned, because like I was like, well, maybe, you know, I had that little true trans, like there may be some people who experience like dysphoria, gender dysphoria, but I can't, because you justify one, you have to justify all of it. And the basis of male and female brain is neurosexism. And when I remember when I was like 17, I was like, I had the stupid little dream of being a neuroscientist. And there was a lot of sexism. Well, there's a lot of sexism in the scientific community, period, but especially in the study of the brain. And they used a lot of that sexism to justify keeping women out of positions of power, keeping women's roles in society minimized and reduced. And so even just the concept of a female brain is a slap in the face to women everywhere. I don't have a female brain, I have a brain.
Yeah.
Well, your brain is made of female DNA. So you can never have a male brain in a female body. I mean, it's really ridiculous.
Well, there's no
idea.
Such thing as a male brain. There's no such thing as a female brain. A brain is a brain.
Right.
Right.
A brain is so, brain, exactly.
And so there's nothing that separates my abilities or my state of being or my will or anything like that. Yes, there are influences by hormones, but that has no effect on the structure or functionality of my brain.
Yeah. Well, we're nearly out of time, but geez, it's good to see some young women with
this is a great conversation.
With good brains. Yeah, I know. But you know, it's really encouraging for me to you know, see young women who are just so who just get their role in society. They get what's happening, like, you know, and the
there's going to be a fourth wave. There's going to be a fourth wave. I really do believe that the youth are pushed into this so much that they're going to rebel big time.
Well, I see that from my daughters. Like I've got, you know, teenage daughters. I've got an adult child and a couple of teenage daughters, but they say, no, I mean, that's trans thing. No, we're not having it. We're not having porn culture either. And, you know, there's statistics saying that girls are, you know, having sex at a much later age. There's a whole bunch of signs that they're just not going to take this shit. But if the institutions and government are still, you know, pushing this agenda on them, what choices are they going to have?
Well, we have to fight this so that they have
we do.
And also we have to foster those young girls' attitudes. Like we have to let them know it's safe to have those attitudes. And it's safe to, if you don't want to do something, don't fucking do it. Or excuse me,
That's
or
right.
YouTube.
No, I swear all the time on this channel.
Oh, okay. Because I have to
thank you so much.
Because I've filmed. I've been in the process of making my own YouTube channel, and I filmed it so many times because you know, there's this whole thing of like demonetization or whatever, and eventually it makes your platform easier to remove. So I'm trying to work on because I do it so often.
Just be yourself, you know, just be yourself. Because, you know, I've screwed up on this before, you know, quite a few times. And people seem to prefer you to be authentic. Yeah, they don't care. They don't seem to care. They don't care about the quality. They don't care about, and they just want to hear authentic voices. And even if you say the wrong thing, most people hop in the comments and say, what the hell did you mean by that? And you get a chance to correct what you said, because everyone says the wrong thing. So yeah, you know, I think there's a real desire for authenticity, because we're up against a falsehood. We're up against lies, deception, and we need authentic voices.
I agree. All right.
Well, thank you so much.
You ready to sign off?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on this channel. It was such a fluke. I actually heard just. Pardon?
I've been a fan of Turf Down Under. I watched that.
Oh, that's hilarious. Thank you. Oh, thanks. I didn't even know. Like,
I loved it when Stone was on there. You know, like she's my homegirl.
Yeah. No, we've had some amazing guests, and I look back at some of the early videos and oh my God, I cringe. I mean, you know, I'll look back at this one in a few months and go, oh my God, you know, because I'm learning from the people that come on the channel too, you know, and just being out there and, you know, I mean, I learned the other day about, remember Sasha put up a post about a woman that she was trying to identify, and I said, shit, that would get someone killed in this country. So there was a lesson for me. That
disturbed me too when you said that. I was like, if it's that, I thought, like, you know, Australia was a bit more developed and doing well, but I was much more lives.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm learning all the time too. And I hope, you know, for the rest of my life that I'm always learning, you know, and that I'm also willing, if I screw up, to own it, you know. I think I'm not, you know, I don't want to become like the other side.
Well,
we just need more women
in
to
the
get
wise
together.
words of Eartha Kitt, I'm always learning, and my tombstone will be my diploma.
Yeah. On that note, thank you so much for coming on our channel, and yeah, fantastic. So yeah, if anyone who's watching, like, share, subscribe. Thank you. See ya.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Later.